that Rick Wiles interviewed on January the 14th from the individuals that they said that they had spoken with. The business person spoke with the individual directly, and then the other person. They said the same thing that Mr. Frum told Lindsay, and that is that the euro was going to collapse first, and after the euro collapsed, then a few weeks later, then the dollar was going to collapse. And so Lindsay was instructed to pay attention to the buzzwords. So since Lindsay shared this of what he was told beginning in late October, I've been watching the news. And I have seen in the news, for example, the Gulf Oil CEO said that oil was going to go to $150 a barrel. If you've ever watched MSNBC, there's an individual by the name of Jim Rogers. He's got this little bow tie. He used to work with George Soros. He had a fund with George Soros, but a few years back he left the United States. He says there's no future in the United States, and he's raising his girls in, I believe, in Singapore. And he always comes on and he's sharing financial stuff from Singapore. Well, he said just a week and a half ago that oil was going to $150 a barrel. And then there was another president, I think it was either an ex-CEO of Shell Oil, said in 2012 we're going to be paying $5 a gallon. So what I'm saying is the same thing that I first heard Lindsay say at the end of October, within a couple months, I saw on the internet news articles that use the same thing, $5 and $150 to $200 a barrel. And then from some of these things, Lindsay's made some DVDs of them. And so in one of his recent DVDs, I actually listened to it on YouTube. He said, let me give you an example of this. And he played like a 5 or an 8 minute segment of Glenn Beck. And I don't have TV, so I don't have an opportunity to watch Glenn Beck every day. Sometimes I hear what he says when it's someone mentions it on the internet or something. But he played a 5 or an 8 minute segment of Glenn Beck, and Glenn Beck was talking with some people, like a panel discussion, I guess. And he was saying, Glenn Beck said, well, here coming up, let's say there's an event. You know, it could be this, it could be that, it could be that. That creates a crisis in the world. And, we might only have 2 or 3 weeks after that. And he says, you guys need to understand that these things are real possible and credible to happen. So you need to prepare yourselves. You need to have 6 months of food and water. You need to be able to prepare yourself. So Lindsay played that as an example that the things that he was told are being said in the media through different sources. Because Lindsay said by being with them that he learned that they had in their club a set of ethics. And part of their code of ethics is they must tell you what they're going to do before they do it. That's part of their code of ethics. But how do they tell you? They tell you either in code or they tell you directly, but while they're telling you directly, somebody else will be sitting beside them, or they'll have somebody else come on after them and tell you the exact opposite. So really you heard it, so your mind got prepared for it, but it wasn't clear and distinct as that being the only voice, and so you heard it, but perhaps you dismissed it. But those who were in the know and knew what the signs and the signals were, and they got the signs and the signals, and of course if they were able to, if they're in the upper club, then maybe they're able to protect themselves. But, to be safe, whether these things happen or not, I don't know. I'm just being a reporter, and I do know that Lindsay's reporting that people on the inside, that's what they're saying for 2011. And now these couple people got interviewed on Rick Wiles, who they've... If I can understand the generic description, who these people was being described, that Rick Wiles interviewed, not the people they interviewed, but the people who was given them the information. One works for an international financial organization, and one is probably a wealthy investment person, is kind of like how they described the couple individuals. But what was interesting is what they were told was the exact same thing that Lindsay's being told, which is the same thing that's on the media. So just hearing and people saying that in and of and by themselves, some people will believe it. Some people will say, I don't believe it. Some people will say, I don't know if I believe it or don't believe it. We'll wait and see. But if these things are being said, and if then they could happen, I need to have evidence in the world that it's possible to happen. Because if it's not even possible, I'm not even going to worry about it. Just because someone says it, who, what? So it's, people can say stuff all the time. It has to be possible to happen. Well, because, over in Europe, we've had debt problems with Ireland, in Greece, in Portugal, and now Spain's got 22% unemployment. Britain's got economic problems. And right now, the U.S. debt, federal debt, is approaching 100% of gross domestic product. So our accumulated federal debt is just past $14 trillion. And the amount of money in goods and services that the United States produces in a year is $14 trillion. So what we produce equals our debt. And when it starts to get to a 1-to-1 ratio, then it starts to be of a concern. So actually right now, if I remember the numbers correctly, Greece and Ireland are a little bit below the United States in the ratio, and they've already had problems. Well, in that ratio of debt versus gross domestic product, Japan is 200%. Their debt is twice what the country produces in 1 year. So it's possible that European nations could collapse under debt, that England could collapse under debt. It's possible the United States to collapse under debt, and it's possible for Japan to collapse under debt. And I don't know some of the details of some of the other countries, but it's possible based upon the circumstances. And because we have a world that's interlinked, if something happens, especially financially, it's going to trigger dominoes. And so if these things are going to happen, and if perhaps they may be able to be planned or manipulated or influenced, then why would they be interested in the collapse of paper currencies? It's because they want to transition from the existing or the old system to the new system. Because the present system that we have was set up following World War II. It's called Bretton Woods. And the system was originally backed by gold, but the U.S. came off the gold standard in 1971. Nixon took the United States off the gold standard. So therefore, our money right now is not backed by anything. It's only backed by confidence. Someone's willing to use it, and someone's willing to take it and value it as a medium of exchange. And so ultimately what the goal or the objective would be is to set up an international financial system that is connected with one world currency. And what's going to be, and the reason why they want to set that up is they also as well want to set up one world government from the chaos. Well, prophetically, I believe that the setting up of one world government and one world currency is an event that is associated with the tribulation. So if they are indicating that perhaps they may collapse the system even this year, then that means we are perhaps that close to either approaching the tribulation or maybe being in the beginning of the tribulation, but just not had the confirming signs that we are. And so these would be what the Bible would describe as being the birth pangs that precede the coming of the Messiah. One other thing that Lindsay was told, and the same numbers were repeated on Rick Wiles' show, is that when the dollar collapses, there will be a 50 to 70% devaluation of the dollar. And in past economic woes in Germany and other places, you don't commonly hear the word devaluation. So I've been trying to figure out what's the ultimate effect of devaluation, because on the surface it sounds like they're taking your money away, but they don't take your money away. If you have $100, they're all of a sudden all of a sudden the next day it's not that you're going to have $50 in the bank instead of $100 in the bank. What happens is what that $100 could purchase, it will only be able to purchase half of those goods once you have the devaluation. You lose the purchasing power of your money. It's not that you decrease the money that you have, it's just it doesn't go as far. So another term for that is inflation. That's what inflation is. Things cost more with the same amount of money. And actually devaluation is a term that speaks in relation to other currencies. And so, say I was going to another country and let's say a loaf of bread costs, I don't know, $3. And so I'm going to Europe, and in Europe I buy a loaf of bread with euros. So if I can take my $3 American, convert it to euros, and buy a loaf of bread, then it's got comparable purchasing power. But if it takes $6 to buy a loaf of bread, converting it into euros, then I've lost. It's an effect of 50% devaluation. So what it means is all the goods that we're, say, importing, which have been cheap, they will double in price when your currency devalues 50%. All your imported goods will double in price. So we have mathematical signs on there that we're approaching the point of no return. And I think the significance of that is when the bursting actually does happen, I'm looking for it to be something that's associated with the tribulation, something that is associated with the setting up of, ultimately, one world government and one world currency. Now, on the surface, or if this is the only thing you hear, or the only thing you meditate upon, or the only thing you concentrate on, it can be depressing, to say the least. But Messiah said, when you see all the turmoil that's going on that he described in Matthew chapter 24, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. And so what I would like to at least create the foundation for in this session, before it's over, that I'll build upon in the afternoon, is try to connect the timing of when they're saying, the secular people are saying, that we're going to have financial problems, not for the U.S. and worldwide. tie the timing of when they're saying that this is going to happen with perhaps God's biblical timeline for the end of days. And I would say normally, the things that I just shared with you, if it was just shared to the general public, that the general public is completely unprepared for something like this. Most Christians are completely unprepared for something like this. But who should not be unprepared is somebody that is seeking to follow the Torah, that understands especially that Messiah came and died for the purpose of gathering and uniting the 12 tribes of Israel, and he's coming again to gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel. Because ultimately, if these things were to happen in the United States tomorrow, I don't know about you. You possibly could have a different opinion than me, and if you did, that would be fine. But my thought is, if we had some type of a real cataclysmic economic event, that the American people aren't just going to sit on their chairs and say, well, I hope things get better tomorrow. They're impatient. And they got lives to live. And they're concerned about being able to live their lives on a day-to-day basis and be able to do the things that they want to do. And so, you know, what have we seen over in Greece and in Ireland? And what are we seeing in Egypt? We're seeing people taken to the streets. We're seeing large protests. And so I would expect those same types of big protests, if things get bad enough, even worse than what they are now, to happen in this country as well. And if your eyes are open, I believe the government expects it as well. And they've been planning the last 30 years for it. They've been meticulously preparing the last 30 years for it. And they've even been preparing the last couple years. And right now, you know, the agency that got started under Bush, which is Homeland Security, and now all government agencies and government controls are now being put under the authority of Homeland Security. They're setting up a central command, even a central command over the United States. And I don't know if you realize this or not, but the United States is divided into 10 sections. And there's not only Federal Reserve sections, but there's Homeland Security sections. And for Homeland Security, it's divided into 10 sections. And Obama just signed an executive order in the past year or so. I don't know exactly the date. I don't remember the date. But to make governors of states, you know, under Homeland Security. And it had something to do with overseeing things in case of possible problems. So, you know, for the people, many of the people who are concerned with the direction that the country is going are, many of them are conservative, Bible-believing Christians. And one of the things that they're concerned about in the direction of the country is we're losing our constitutional freedoms. And they're concerned about their liberty. And so, if you do not know what the end times are about, the tribulation is about, if you don't know that the second coming of the Messiah is about Him coming to gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel, and you don't have any understanding that the Bible tells you that when the tribulation days come, like it says in Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 50, you who escape the sword, stand not still, remember the Lord afar off, and let Jerusalem come to your mind. And that if it's not in you that this is what the Word really says, I can pretty much guarantee you what the majority of Christians are going to do and how they're going to react. They're going to try to fight for the Constitution of the United States and fight to keep this country the way that they grew up and have loved it. The only problem with that is if we are in the tribulation, God doesn't say, if you're living outside the United States, to fight for your country. He says in Revelation chapter 18, flee out of the midst of Babylon. And so in Jeremiah 51 verse 50, it says, those in Babylon who escaped the sword, let Jerusalem come to your mind. And so there's two groups of believers in the book of Revelation. In the one group is Revelation chapter 13, when it speaks about the beast ruling for 42 months. It says in verse 6, he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given him to make war with the saints and overcome them. He made war with the saints and overcame them. And then it says, verse 9, if any man has an ear, let him hear. He that leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He that kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. And so, in speaking about the beast overcoming the saints, 2 verses later it says, if any man has an ear, let him hear. In other words, pay attention to what's going to be said. And then it says, he that kills the sword must be killed with the sword. So those, for example, those Bible-believing Christians that go grab their guns and join the militia because they've got to protect the Constitution of the United States and beat the bad boys, if we're in the tribulation, then they have to fight according to natural odds. And natural odds for them aren't very good. But now we have another group of people in the book of Revelation. And it's in Revelation chapter 15, verses 2 and 3. And it says, I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that got the victory over the beast, over his image, over his mark, and over the number of his name. We have another group that's getting the victory. And how are they described? They're described at the end of verse 2 that they have the harps of God, and they sing the song of Moses, and they sing the song of the Lamb. So we have a description of those who get the victory. They have harps, and they're singing the song of Moses and the song of the Lamb. What message is being communicated to us by those words? Well, we're going to look at what it means to have harps and what the song of the Lamb is. And we'll go to Psalm 137. Psalm 137, verse 1 says, by the rivers of Babylon we sat down. We wept when we remembered Zion, and we hanged our harps on the willow. So, in Babylon, you weep. In Babylon, you hang your harp on the willow. And then verse 3, for there, they that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. So we're in Babylon, so that means we're weeping. And our harp's on the willow, which means we can't play it. And when you play a musical instrument, it's usually you play something of joy. And our captives are, in essence, coming to us and mocking us and saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. And so our reply is, how? How can we sing Yahweh's song in a strange land? What's the strange land? The strange land is Babylon. How can you sing his song in Babylon? Of course, the answer is you can't. And what song is it referring to? Song of Zion. The song that you can't sing in Babylon is the Song of Zion. And the Song of Zion is called the Lord's Song. But who is the Lord? It is Yeshua. In John chapter 1 verse 29, he's the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. So The Lord's song that's being sung in Revelation 15 verse 3 is called the Song of the Lamb. Because the Lamb is the Messiah, and the Messiah gathers and unites the 12 tribes of Israel. And the uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel is likened to a song. Because once the children of Israel came out of Egypt, and they crossed the Red Sea, and Pharaoh and his army drowned in the Red Sea, in Exodus chapter 15, they sang the Song of Moses. When they came out of Egypt, and they don't have to worry about their enemy no more, they sang. And so, the gathering and uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel in the end of days by the Messiah is called in the Bible a new song. A new song. Because it is something that's never happened before. Now, the coming out of Egypt can be likened to it, but even that, compared to how this will be, is too small. And so, when you compare the two, then given that Passover is the celebration of redemption from your enemy, historically from Egypt, but in the future from the beast and the beast system, and that one world government and other aspects of the beast system that are after you in the tribulation in the end of days, deliverance from that is, there's nothing to compare that to. So that is a new song. So you'll often see in the scriptures that in speaking about the gathering of the exiles of Israel, it will be associated with singing or dancing or joy. And an example of this in Jeremiah chapter 31 verse 7 says, "Thus says Yahweh, sing with gladness for Jacob, shout among the chief of the nations, publish ye, praise ye, and say, O Yahweh, save your people, the remnant of Israel." So what are you singing about and shouting about and publishing about and praising? Verse 8, "Behold, I will bring them from the north country and gather them from the coast of the earth, and with them the blind and the lame, the women with child and her that travails with child, together a great company shall return." Says, verse 10, "Hear the word of Yahweh, O ye nations, and declare it in the isles afar off, and say, He that scattered Israel will gather him and keep him, as a shepherd does his flock." Now, this is the Sabbath. And in describing the creation of the world, we're told in Genesis chapter 1 and in Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, that it was on the seventh day that the Creator rested. And then in Isaiah, in chapter 58, in verse 13, it says, "If you will turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of Yahweh honorable." So the Sabbath is called my holy day. The Sabbath is called the holy of Yahweh. And so the weekly Sabbath, of course, being a day of rest, is meant to instruct you and teach you, and it's prophetic of what's called the prophetic Sabbath, or the eschatological Sabbath, which is the Messianic era. The Messianic era is a time of Sabbath for the earth. It's a time of Sabbath for who were the exiles of Israel. They're resting. They're dwelling safely. In Jeremiah, in chapter 23, in verse 6, it says, "In his days, the days of the Messiah, Judah will be saved, and Israel will dwell safely. Messianic era, dwelling safely. And then in Ezekiel, in chapter 37, Ezekiel 37, verse 26, I will make a covenant of peace with them. Dwelling safely, covenant of shalom. So what's the thematic connection? Sabbath. So the Messianic era is the eschatological Sabbath. And this covenant of shalom, this covenant of peace, where his people are going to dwell safely, it's phrased this way in Jeremiah in chapter 50, in verses 4 and 5. It says, in those days and in that time. That's an idiomatic expression for the day of Yahweh, or the day of the Lord. The children of Israel shall come, they and the children of Judah together, going and weeping. They will seek Yahweh their Elohim, and they will ask the way to Zion, saying, come and let us join ourselves to Yahweh in a perpetual covenant that will not be forgotten. What is this covenant that will not be forgotten? It's the covenant of peace of Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 26. It is a covenant where the nation of Israel will no longer go into exile. It's a covenant where the Messiah of Israel will roll over them. It's a covenant where the Messiah of Israel will be instructing and teaching them. And his people will be following the Torah by the help and the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So, the gathering of the exiles of Israel is likened to a song. So, in Psalm chapter 98, and in traditional Judaism, Psalm 98 is one of the Psalms of the Sabbath. And so this says, sing unto Yahweh a new song. So that's speaking of the gathering of the exiles of Israel. For he has done marvelous things. His right hand and his holy arm has gotten him the victory. Gotten him what victory? Over the enemies. Who's the enemies? The captors of the exiles of Israel. And then it says in verse 2, Yahweh has made known his salvation, his righteousness, has he openly shown in the sight of the nations. He's openly shown it. The new song, his right hand and holy arm has gotten him the victory. The new song, he's openly showing his deliverance in the sight of the heathen. Verse 3, he's remembered his